Cozy Corner of Cinema, episode number 169, being recorded on Tuesday, June 24th, 2025 at 11:25 p.m. No coffee for obvious reasons. Don't want to be up all night, so a glass of water will do. But you don't want to drink too much water before you go to bed, because then, you get all comfortable and cozy underneath the sheets, and then, oh my gosh, you got to get up because your bladder just has to go. But perhaps you're not under the sheets on days like these, or nights like these, I should say. The temperature has been rising steadily. This is the perfect time to get out the air conditioners, get out the fans, and just as importantly, get out your dehumidifiers. Get a temperature gauge to keep track of the humidity in the room, especially if you are a collector of films or anything of the sort, wanting to make sure that whatever it is that you want to maintain and take care of is being properly maintained and taken care of. And a dehumidifier will do just that. It's going to suck out all that moisture. And it's going to make those, in my case, those Blu-rays, in the best condition they can be, so to speak. But anyways, man, I was looking online and I was talking to an acquaintance, and I think it was the New York Times that were putting out a reader poll for their 10 favorite films of the 21st century so far, which is nothing short of a gargantuan task should you have seen many films from the 21st century. I mean, the 21st century, we are only 25 years in, and it is almost overwhelming the amount of incredible films to be seen. That to limit it to just 10, I find is overwhelming to the point of, I would say, almost impossible. Let alone if it was ranked, which I'm not really doing any kind of ranking, so to speak. That's partially why I stopped doing the top 10 year videos or audios, for myriad reasons. One of them definitely being that, opinions change over time, and films that I feel passionately about, I may not feel as passionately about down the line, and I would rather not that be set in stone, to have any sort of, definitive list. And at the same time, of course, when you're talking about these films, it's not right to, I don't think it's right to rank, to pit films against each other the way that, I may rate an adult film as high as I rate, some American classic, some widely regarded American classic, and on paper it'd be like, well, these are the same ratings, so they're of the same merit and of the same quality, and of course not. So when it comes to these sorts of lists, I mean, there'll be recommendations. If people are like, oh, what's a good film here and there, I'm not going to say, here's like a top 10 or anything like that. It's more so, it's kind of like, hey, these are quality films that you should watch. But I was thinking about, in a bit of a smaller scale, of just films of the last 15 years or so, which that too, I mean, gosh, how many? I mean, there's just so many to kind of go from there. I mean, it's overwhelming, but I think of just a handful of films of recent memory that have really stuck with me, and that I can confidently call favorite films. Get another sip of this here. And so trying to put together any sort of 10 for the last 15 years, I'm sorry, for the last 25 years, it's just not going to happen. It's just, you're getting so many different backgrounds, so many different tastes of films, that there's no real sort of gauge. It's just sort of like, what are the most populist films in this sort of, in this sort of election. Because I can think of films of my own taste of the last 15 years alone, and I think of films, like, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course because I haven't even said anything yet, so it could be anything, but I think of only a couple real total like favorite films. I'm talking about ones that I can confidently put up with, just some of the greatest films of all time, and ones that to me I find to be in that kind of conversation. A couple notable ones really stand out. Sip of that water there. If you hear pauses, that's what it is. I want to think that your feed cut out or anything like that. Um, but Phantom Thread from 2017 is one of those films. I think Paul Thomas Anderson. I find his career in a lot of ways to be mirrored that of Quentin Tarantino, where they start off and they I think are trying to, as many filmmakers do, but in this case because they're two very popular filmmakers coming out around the same time, so to speak, and are still making these big kind of films. But you see the early work, and they're definitely trying to find their footing. They're trying to find who they are, who their style, what their style really is. I mean, with Tarantino, you can look at the True Romance. The screenplay of that, even though that film was directed by Tony Scott, it definitely feels like Tarantino characters. In a way where you have all the characters who are, making pop culture references, they're making film references. You have Christian Slater's character in that film who enjoys comic books, and he goes to see the Street Fighter with Sonny Chiba early on, and it's actually funny watching the remake of Breathless with Richard Gere, and you watch that film and how steeped in pop culture that film is. Breathless by Jim McBride, a very different film than Jean-Luc Godard's film. But unique in its own right. I mean, it has that LA style. Richard Gere's into comic books, and it's unquestionable. I'm sure the influence that film had on Tarantino writing. But anyways, it's not until later on with Paul Thomas Anderson as well. It's sort of like when you have something like Hard A, which feels more of like a contemporary noir in a way. But then, Magnolia definitely feels inspired by something like an Altman film, like a Robert Altman film. And then, as he goes on, he starts to find his footing more, much like Tarantino, where I think there's a certain point for both of them. There's a certain, I would say Paul Thomas Anderson sooner, but that's not a detriment to Tarantino, a certain maturity that I find so far more engaging than spectacle. And they're two very different kinds of filmmakers, but I think that what you're looking for in a mid 2000s Tarantino film, in the same way that you look at a mid 2000s Paul Thomas Anderson film, is very different. I look at something like Punch Drunk Love and the maturity in that film and the way that those characters are handled and written in a very nuanced way, whereas with the 2000s Tarantino stuff, it's not going for that necessarily. But this does still have its strong characters. But jumping ahead a little bit, when I think of like their later work, in terms of the closest to contemporary, I think of I think Tarantino's strongest film to me is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's such a at first you're kind of maybe taken aback because you're like, well, this is at the time of this recording, his newest film. It's the one that to me, it's another one that I would call a favorite film for myriad reasons. I think not getting into the whole thing now because time is not on my side and I can't get into it. It was a very big part of that summer for me, summer 2019. Just seeing the film again and again and just telling people about it and I know that film's back in my hand, but there's a certain maturity in that film that feels so what's what I'm looking for. It feels like such a relief where it does have the moment. It doesn't have the sequence of over the top violence that you would expect in a Tarantino film, but where that film shines the strongest are the characters. When you have Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth just on their own interacting, that's really where Tarantino's writing shines so much. Even something simple like I remember there's a point in the film, and I won't spoil it in case you haven't seen it, but there's a character that is seemingly in danger at the end, And I remember more than one time seeing it theatrically, which I don't really see a lot of films theatrically more than once, so bear that in mind. But hearing the audience actually gasp at a moment where you think a character's in danger because we're so involved with these characters. And then even the last interaction between Rick and Cliff in the movie, it feels so sincere and touching. And then you have moments later in that when you have Rick talking to Jay Sebring, and that whole sequence is like it almost like makes me emotional watching it because it's just the way that you love take away the real history of the whole situation. When you have these characters interacting, there's a certain there's the love that Tarantino has that is fully on screen in a way that I find far more interesting than the bloody kind of sword fights and shootouts from his other films. And that's not a detriment to those films. They're going for a different type of feel. But I'm somebody who's far more interested in characters and really good characters in the same way that when you have Paul Thomas Anderson, Phantom Thread is a film that it's kind of why I don't like to do contemporary or any like kind of like quick like rank list, because I remember when I first saw, and there's another thing I want to talk about in kind of relation to this, when I first saw Phantom Thread, I felt about it the same way that I felt about both The Master and maybe a little less with Inherent Licorice Pizza, which is I watched all those films for the first time and I said, okay, this is good, but I'm feeling a distance from myself to this film in a way that I think I need to revisit this intentionally with time past. And I did that for all three. With Phantom Thread, I did see it again theatrically, so not as much time passed. With The Master, I had waited a couple of years, and then same with Licorice Pizza. Actually, the last time that I watched Licorice Pizza was when I was doing my top 10 of 2021. And with Licorice Pizza, I grew such a stronger and more of a love for that film. So much so that, I mean, if you want to listen to the list, you can see where that ranks. But it ended up being very high for me. And I was able to appreciate the nuance and the way that the characters interact in a way that feels real, that I just can't get on board with this sort of contemporary, everybody goes online and immediately jumps to conclusions or has these kind of crazy opinions when a film first comes out. Films have to, any kind of art has to sit with you, man. But when The Master as well, it was like a gut punch the second time I watched it, where I was taken aback, not just by the brilliant performances across the board, that goes without saying, but just the way that some of the plot points and some of the plot progression that the first time I was like, this isn't really working for me. The pacing's off here and there. For whatever reason, on that second viewing, that all faded away and I was just completely immersed in the film. When it comes to Phantom Thread, that's a different beast altogether. I feel confident in saying I think that's that is my favorite of his work. I've said before, I don't think there's any such thing as best. I don't think well this is objective. No, that's nonsense. There's absolute nonsense. There's no such thing as this is the better movie, but I like that more. If you like a film more, that's the better movie, man. This whole nonsense of like, well, his other film is better, but I like this one more. No. The one you like more is the better film. To me, that's not like that stand behind your opinion, man. Don't succumb to what anybody else wants you to think, or kind of succumb to societal peer pressure where, well, that one got better reviews, so that's the better movie, but I like this one more. It's like, nope, the latter is the better movie, man, because you like it more. With Phantom Thread, I think that is such a mature, such an adult, and such a fully realized film in a way where I every time I watch it, I pick up on something more and more. I think it has its comedic parts intentionally, but I find it, for a lot of it, to be a tragic, but also incredibly romantic. There's one part in that film that always stood with me, even from the first time I saw it. There's a scene early on when you have Daniel Day-Lewis and Vicky, I don't know how to say her last name. It's Cripes or Kreps? I don't know how to say her name. She's been in a bunch of films. Hold Me Tight. What the hell was that Viggo Mortensen Western? No, my gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it now. It's late, so I can't remember these things. She has a new film out, Hot Milk, which I've been wanting to see. But anyways, they get back from a romantic evening, and she asks him, they're sitting by the fire, and she asks him something along the lines of, "You've never been married?" And his immediate reply with a straight face is, I make dresses. Like, in that moment, that character had never even processed these two different things going on, that he is so intently focused on his work and on his passions that the idea of any kind of romantic endeavor, some truly romantic endeavor, has just never crossed him. He's, we see in the film he has, women around. He definitely, he's a popular. He's a popular dressmaker. That's all great. But in that moment, there's a pause between that where she says basically, well, there's nothing else that you could have done. Not verbatim, of course. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but it's that moment. That's all it is, just that little moment. You don't need this character to be like, well, I've been so devoted to my work that I've just never been interested. No, that character is far more complex and nuanced than that. And I think when you get to that halfway point, which would be in any other film, the climax, where, well, this character is this way and this character is this way. It's not like that at all. The both of them have layers to them. The both of them have something more going on behind their eyes that are looking for something more that ultimately is one of the most romantic films I've ever seen, in a way where it feels so honest with its characters, where their flaws are very much a part of them, but it doesn't define them. So somebody who has done everything he can to be written off has maybe found the only person who is almost a parallel in a way. So there's a lot I don't want to get into, because I think if you haven't seen the film, it must be seen. I think it's truly one of the great films, period. And the soundtrack by, what the hell's his name? Johnny from Radiohead. I'm blanking on his last name. I do apologize. I think that is just one of the great contemporary film scores. Just a beautiful soundtrack. It's a film that there's so much to talk about with it. That's a whole other conversation. I truly cannot get it. It can't even begin to get into the specificities of it in this one kind of episode. But maybe that'll come back at another point. But one of the films that when I was thinking about, like, my favorite films of the century, and I'm thinking more so recent, because when I think of like the 2000s, 2010, there's plenty of films that just come to mind. Like I was saying before, Punch Drunk Love, Training Day, The Pianist, Battle Royale, Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring, Goodbye Dragon Inn, the Pusher Trilogy, Sideways, Zodiac, The Brown Bunny, In Bruges, Uncle Boonmee Who Can Recall His Past Lives, 127 Hours. These are just a couple of these films, but I'm sure I'm going to listen back to this or think back to it later and go, oh, I should have mentioned this film and this film and this film and this film and this film. But that's why I can't possibly put this into any sort of compendium, any sort of list. It can't be done, nor will I attempt to do it. It's just not going to happen. Excuse me. But of a recent-ish film, because there's not a lot of films of like the past 10, 15 years that I have that strong of opinions of. I mean, Phantom Thread and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Tree of Life. These are films I am overwhelmingly enthusiastic about. And one of them, which I may have talked about on the show before, but it's one that, when I was thinking about the best films this century, one that just always comes to mind is from Kenneth Lonergan, with his 2016 film Manchester by the Sea. And Kenneth Lonergan, he's only done a couple of films. I think this is only his third film that he's done. I shouldn't say only, as if only third, because it's quality, not quantity, guys. But he's primarily a writer as well. But he directed in 2000 You Can Count on Me, which I haven't seen at the time of this recording. And then he did Margaret in 2011, which I remember seeing back in 2011, and I wasn't overwhelmingly... I didn't really have many strongly positive thoughts, but I would like to rewatch it because it has now been 14 years since I've seen that film. But Manchester by the Sea, much like Phantom Thread in a way where, maybe even less so, less enthusiastic than I was about Phantom Threads. I remember seeing that theatrically because it was getting Academy Award talk. People were talking about it, and I saw it theatrically, and it didn't really do much for me. I was like, okay, I was able to appreciate the performances, and I was able to appreciate the story, of course, but there was a certain disconnect that I didn't really get. Or there's a certain disconnect that kind of prevented me from enjoying the film more. And I say enjoy. I don't mean like I'm happy. I guess I am kind of happy because I'm happy watching this incredible film. But then I've seen it a couple more times, and each time I watch it, I think the more and more, like with Phantom Thread, I'm just noticing the little kinds of interactions with these characters. I mean, this was a popular film from 2016. I don't think I really need to go too much into it. But we have, so Kenneth Lonergan directing it. We have Casey Affleck in the film, Michelle Williams, Kyle Chandler, Lucas Hedges. And we basically we cut back and forth. We in time we have Casey Affleck's character Lee Chandler. He is working as a maintenance man in this apartment complex. He's very antisocial. He's very unfriendly. He spends his time off getting drunk and getting into fights. He lives a very miserable kind of life. He's a very what's the word I'm looking for? Very not nihilistic. It's very gosh, what the hell is it called? It's late. I'm not gonna bother trying to find the word. But anyways, his brother's in the hospital. He's got to go back home, and at the same time, he's got to take care of his. I think it was his nephew, played by Lucas Hedges, who he hasn't seen since from when something happened in his past, and we start to put the pieces together until eventually, really halfway through, it all is kind of laid out of what happened in his past to sort of bring him to this point, and sort of the notoriety that he has, and the complicated relationship that he has with a lot of people. Michelle Williams as well is in the film, and she's great in the film because she's really not in it a lot. She's in it when she needs to be. They have one real kind of contemporary to the story, full-on interaction, where some of the dialogue that she's saying is giving us more about their background than if we had these ridiculous melodramatic scenes. The movie is anything but melodramatic when it could have easily fallen into this sort of, characters just yelling at each other, characters just monologuing to each other with perfectly placed dialogue. There's no hiccups, there's no stutters. It's just perfectly scripted so that when you get your Oscar nomination, they can play that one clip and you'd be like, wow, man. No, this is a much quieter, much more down-to-earth film, and I remember even hearing that people were talking about this, like, oh, well, this is kind of like a slow, kind of boring movie and all that, and to each their own. But that's just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life. The film it really takes its time with going through what Casey Affleck is going through. Sort of like there's as much build as you can for the sort of character who is resistant to any kind of change. He's really resistant to any kind of lifestyle that isn't how he's already settled into, and sort of the relationship that he has with his nephew, and their back and forth is great. Casey Affleck won the Academy Award for this, and rightfully so. He's an actor who I think in general gives a lot of deadpan performances, but here it fits so well to the character where it makes sense for that character after what he's been through. Because even something like The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, also one of the great films of the 21st century to me, he has that deadpan kind of quality, but he's able to really emote when he needs to. And here it's that same sort of thing where he just will have moments where he doesn't need to say anything, where he can just emote solely with his body language. There's one part where Lucas Hedges' character is trying to get intimate with a girl, and he's like, I need you to stay downstairs and just make small talk with the ma, and he's just barely saying anything. He's really kind of keeping his head down. He's making a point to not engage in small talk. It's so well done, and it really is one of these films where the more that I've thought about it since seeing it in 2016, the more that I've seen it, I can confidently say this is one of my favorite films ever. And it's not as if I've have not been in a situation like this, thankfully. Not necessarily with the background of Casey Affleck's character, but certain films you watch where you can relate to it more because you've been in maybe a character's shoes or something like that. And here, not necessarily, but I've known people like this, and I've met people who sort of embody this, whether they have any kind of history like this or not. Just these simple kind of realistic interactions that make the emotion so much more rewarding and makes it feel so much more earned. So by the end of the film, not everything is wrapped up in a nice, neat bow, but these characters have gone through something with each other. They have, even if it's something little or something major, it all feels earned. And when they actually start to, become more emotional and become more outwardly with their feelings, it all is in a way where I can't stress it, it feels so earned. It feels so right. I just think this is just a brilliant, just incredible film. It's one that, if you had asked me in 2016, like, hey, what's the best films this year? Or what are your favorite films this year? I probably wouldn't have even mentioned this. And then now it's in 2025, almost 10 years later, and here I am talking about this one film that I saw this one time theatrically, and I thought didn't make much of an impression on me at the time. And all these years later, I'm talking about how emotionally it's affected me and how, each time that I've seen it, I've grown more and more closer to the film. And just it being in the circle of just one of these great films, period. I really, really love this film, and that's not putting it strongly enough, and of course, I don't have the time to get into it as much, but another film that I hadn't even talked about on the show, but I really wanted to mention, at least I'll mention this briefly, because there's a lot to get into with this film, and I think, again, this is one of, when you have a director like Scorsese, who, making not only a good film, but one of the best films, one of the very, very best films of his career, is what he did in 2016 with his film Silence, which is funny because I didn't actually see this when it came out, and I didn't avoid it. I just, for whatever reason, I didn't see it theatrically, and I hadn't seen it until fairly recently, and then blown away doesn't even begin to put it. I almost shouldn't have even mentioned it because I want to kind of get into it, talk about it, but perhaps I will remember to talk about it more so next time. So we're going to put that film on the back burner because I really don't want to speed through that. I want to talk about a lot of the themes going on in that film. But I'm talking about before is that, if you're making any of these kind of lists, don't just look at, hey, here are the only 10 films that I think are great, or here are the 10 best films or my 10 favorite films. There's so much more to that. Look up lists. Look up, here are great films from 2004. Here are great films from 2010. Great films from 2015. Anything like that to kind of get a bigger picture, because if you're trying to limit to only 10 films from 25 years, that's like saying, like, you can only pick one song, only pick a couple of songs to listen to for the rest of your life. It's like, well, what the hell does that mean? It's sort of like, am I valuing this one song that I like, to feel this one emotion to, compared to this other song that makes me feel a different emotion? It's ultimately your prerogative, but that'll do it for this episode, guys. I appreciate you guys listening. I appreciate you guys, leaving, the thumbs up there. That's really cool, man. I don't really look at it too much, but sometimes when I go to click on the YouTube sort of video button to see what the next episode is, because I forget what number that I'm on, I sometimes will see, like, oh, this is one, thumbs up or 2 thumbs up. So I appreciate that, guys. It's really cool, man, that, I'm sure like it's just some sort of some sort of traction or something, But anyways, I'm going to end it right here. You guys take care. All the best. And I'll be back next time. So thank you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.